help you guys avoid some of the disasters that we've helped some of you deal with. So I'm Sara. I have a sort of non-traditional background for a lawyer. I'm an entrepreneur myself. I've started several companies, grew them to over 10 million in revenue in a pretty short time. I love helping people grow companies. Before doing this, I was the head of legal, sales, and marketing for a big med spa and a software company in the aesthetics space. And we work with med spas from all over the country, helping them really set up correctly from the beginning. And then also, if some sort of disaster happens, helping mitigate the damages and respond to board complaints, avoid malpractice suits, things like that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Michael.
Hey guys, how are you? Michael Antosy. As Chad mentioned, I'm the Director of Practice Growth Consulting here with MyAdvice. Just to give you a bit of our background as an organization, we specialize in really helping to drive new revenue opportunities, patient acquisition, lead flow, really from your holistic web presence. Been doing this as an organization now for over 20 years. We serve about 2,500 practices all throughout the United States as well as internationally. Definitely excited to talk to you guys about today about avoiding some of the marketing pitfalls and avoiding the position of having to overspend on your strategy, ultimately see a lower return on your investment, which we'll certainly get into. With my background, I've been consulting in this space for over a decade. I'm on faculty at organizations like the Aesthetic Show. I've presented before at organizations like the Terry Ross's 4S Business Summit, AmSpa, Aesthetic Record, you name it. We've really been very heavily focused within aesthetics, and so I'm definitely very excited to meet everyone here today as well.
Wonderful, Michael. Thank you very much. As we get started today, we're looking back now over the past 11 months of 2023. Crazy. We're almost to the end of the year, and heading into 2024. So, Sara, let's start with you today, and as we kind of are reflecting back on this year, and you've had tremendous growth. We had an opportunity, for those who are watching, listening, Michael and I had an opportunity to visit with Sara in New York about a week and a half ago, and to catch up with her while we were out there in person, which was wonderful, and to learn more about her. And we've obviously done some webinars in the past, and I'm grateful for the relationship that we have. But Sara, you shared some great things with us that night, but I'd love for you to share a little bit more with this audience about some of the general pitfalls that you've run into and that you're helping with. So maybe talk about the three main pitfalls that you've seen practices run into in 2023 and how to avoid those moving forward.
Yeah, great question. I think that the three main areas where I see pitfalls are in the basic legal setup of the practice. So a lot of times people are not set up correctly from the start, and we can go over like what that means, but generally it always comes back to having the right legal structure and having the right legal contracts between you and your medical director and you and your staff. So that's number one. Number two is like not practicing within scope of practice. So that's the number two thing that boards look at, that we see investigations about. And number three is really about employee relationships. So not having the appropriate contracts with your employees, with your contractors. At first, it seems like it's okay, but then when your employee leaves and they go work for a competitor 2 blocks away, and you regret never having that contract that you were always going to get to.
Right.
Yeah. So those are the three main things legally that we see as trouble.
And kind of expanding upon that a little bit, what is the cost? What does it cost a practice who waits? You talked about somebody's like, I'll get to that. I'll get to that agreement with my employee, or I'll get that with my practice administrator, but they never do. They never get things set up properly. What are the real costs that happen for those that put this off?
Yeah, I mean, the costs that happen are kind of scary. I mean, 25,000 to 100,000 in different penalties and fees, in having your patient list stolen, in a board investigation, in a lawsuit from one of your employees for something very, very minor that could have been avoided if you had a good contract. So the costs like really become high. And I always say to people like, look, if you're planning to fail and it doesn't matter, then it doesn't matter, right? If you have $100,000 bill, but you're going to declare bankruptcy, maybe you can make that go away. But what we want to set people up is to be successful. And if you're going to be successful, to have this $100,000 cost that was totally avoidable is a shame. And I feel like it's our job to help people, both Michael and I, to protect them from these things, from these mistakes that down the line are 100,000. But if you would have just spent 5,000 or less, it could be totally avoided.
Yeah.
So my gosh, it's crazy, right? So let me paint this whole picture. Here you are as a nurse injector, a doctor. You've been maybe the ER world. You've been a family practice doc, for a long time. Now you're saying, hey, I really want to move into aesthetics. I'm passionate about this. I love this. I actually have a gift for this. Great. In this entrepreneur world, you're now getting into, because it feels like, hey, I can just take my talents and open up this business and get going. And I've got my license. I'm covered on these pieces. But there's other nuances that you may not know about may end up costing you. And as you were talking, Sara, I'm reflecting back to my business law classes, right? And everything that was in there was this idea of how do you mitigate issues? Issues might happen, but how do you mitigate them? And the one thing that our professor would stress over and over again is, look, anytime it comes to anything litigious, it's time and money. Even if you have a great attorney who can mitigate damages and help you and defend you, there's still costs involved. It's your time and your money that's going to be there. But if you can do things right in advance, there's a lot of protections there. And so for our audience listening, they probably didn't attend a business law class. It's not new, they were in a nursing program. I was in a little bit of a law business side, track, and so different. So we understand that some of these concepts and business principles can be foreign to you. And so, my gosh, my heart goes out to those that are just, it's a little ignorance, right? And we get it. You just I just want to help people. And suddenly I'm saddled with these problems and they're avoidable. And I think that's the message today. We'll talk about how to avoid those. So thanks, Sara. Anything else you want to add on that?
No, I think we're good for
Awesome.
now.
So Michael, same question to you, as you kind of reflect on this year and, practices that you've talked to, those that that waited on things, or those that maybe chose the wrong company. Let's talk about that. And I'd like you maybe to talk about when we had somebody that, we do have some of the legal pieces. We had an employee who left, and he took a handful of clients, that kind of followed him over. But within a couple months, they realized it was smoke and mirrors and actually came back to us. They were like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize how good I had it. That was a hot mess. And so, we see that, but they lost a lot of time and money. So maybe talk about those. But what are some other things, Michael, that you see are a challenge for practices when they just some of the pitfalls this past year that the practices made?
Yeah. So probably the biggest pitfall that I see very commonly with practice owners rarely has actually nothing to do with marketing. It has everything to do with this idea of a mindset. And do you view the lens of business building as a cost to you or as an expense, or do you really view it through the lens of it being an investment? And for those that are attending here, let me just say, with MyAdvice, with Lengea Law, like when you work with organizations like ours, you are really investing into your growth. You're investing into your business maturation. I have a little boy at home who's 11 months old, and kind of an analogy that I'll always say is, with my son, imagine, not feeding him a bottle every 2 hours, or imagine not loving on him. He's a beautiful little boy, and everyone says, well, that's crazy. And my thought then is that, well, why are you then doing this to your business? Why are you not putting in the necessary resources back into business building? And I want to kind of reframe this, Chad, too, because I think that these words marketing or advertising, frankly, they have a very negative connotation for some folks. What we help to do is we help to build your business, and it's brick by brick. It's not necessarily things that are expensive to do, but they are necessary to really have. But when you treat those things as necessity, as options, it really will take any practice owner much further away from their growth trajectory. So number one, I would certainly say it really starts with having a good growth mindset that you really have to adapt into. Secondly, it's also knowing and understanding, who to trust in this space. Um, Starting up a digital marketing company, wanting to work with a practice, there's a very low barrier to entry into that market. And as new entrants come in, what they typically will do is they will try to undercut more established businesses in this space through lower price points, no contracts involved, so on and so forth. But guys, what I will say is that there's a lot of folks that can do your digital marketing for you, but when you are an aesthetics practice, it requires an understanding just beyond how to market, understanding, things of staffing that you might be going through and challenges in that regard. What we do is we really fit into the holistic business infrastructure. Understanding the language of, the neurotoxins that you might be offering at your practice or the body contouring devices, because the quicker that things can happen in terms of communication and collaboration, the faster results can be realized. And so when you work with a partner in this space that really truly understands your business model, it actually becomes much less expensive for you to really grow your practice when you aggregate that out over the course of time. So secondly, it's again, knowing who to trust, but understanding that this field really does require an acute sense of specialization. And
Yeah.
I would also say then the third aspect of this is really participation. And I think this kind of relates back to a little bit of the mindset of having a growth mindset. But these are assets that you're building into your practice that you're growing into. Not necessarily that's something that you have to really be hands-on on a day-to-day basis, but you obviously want to care about growing your strategy out if you want practice to really, if you want revenue to really flourish more. So again, I would say that those are probably the three biggest mistakes that I see practice owners really making in today's age.
So Michael, thank you for that. And I kind of, if I heard you right, what I'm hearing you say is that these practice owners, the shift is going from being just an injector to, like Sara, like you said, an entrepreneur. You're now a business owner. You are essentially the general of the practice, and you have to be the one in control. You're making the tough decisions. You're in control of the culture. You're in charge of who you're hiring. You're in charge of the way things are going to run. And it's not just about, you can't just worry about injecting or doing a laser treatment or whatever. You actually, there's so many other parts you have to worry about. And so part of that is, who do you surround yourself with that are your coaches, that are going to make you better? Who also, do you develop that trust with? And then being an active participant. And I couldn't agree with you more. We have found on our end that those that will participate, that are scheduling priorities. So as you do like a pre-week planning and looking at your week or your month of knowing, okay, my scheduled call with Lengea Law is a priority. I will not miss that. I will not schedule on top of that. This is the way it's going to go. My appointment this month with MyAdvice is critical, or whoever my marketing company is, right? I will not miss that. My team will go around, will schedule around that because I will not miss that, because that is critical to my business growth and my business, maintenance. So what you're talking about is 2 hours out of a month, just as an example, that you're going to dedicate to say, this is what I'm investing in my business. And I'm working on myself. And so I think that for everyone listening, I think that's a great takeaway. So thank you very much for sharing that. Did I summarize that well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I sympathize with practice owners as well too, because it's really easy to get lost in the rat race. When you are the owner of your practice, there's so many things that you have that are going on. It's ordering product from your vendors, it's worrying about payroll, it's making sure that you have enough staff to cover a lot of the leads that are coming in or patients that need to be seen. But it's so critical that you really set the priority. And really, I would also say, just to understand that the inexpensive way out is it's a for surefire way out. My father-in-law always says that quality is economy. If you actually really want to drive value, it requires bringing on the right partners like Sara, like MyAdvice, to really help you with reaching a lot of these business growth objectives that you have.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Sara, you talked about, the legal setup, working out a scope and employee relationship. Would you mind, without breaking any confidences, can you share some examples of where you've seen these things fall apart for some various practices, and what little steps in advance could have been taken to avoid those issues?
Yeah.
Love to hear some specific, examples. We got some case study almost, if you will.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll add a fourth one. And the fourth one is equipment contracts, like signing up for these equipment
Yes.
purchases and thinking that the equipment somehow is going to drive traffic to your door without doing the marketing. That is also like a big one. So let's talk about a case study with organizational setup. So what happens is people don't realize that you're setting up a medical practice, no matter what you call it, even if you call it beautiful lips. If you're providing these treatments like IV hydration or lip filler, it's a medical practice. And so it has to be set up in a certain way in all the states that prohibit the corporate practice of medicine, which is like more than 30 states. So we had a client who was not set up in this way, even though this client is extremely smart and has been in the industry for 20 years. So what happened was one of their competitors called the boards and said, this person is operating non-compliantly. She's an RN and she doesn't have the right legal setup. And the person working for her shouldn't be working for her and shouldn't be doing the treatments that she's doing. And so they had someone who came in and pretended to be a patient, and the boards do this. And they basically wrote them up for pages and pages of different violations that required them to close, because at that point they weren't set up correctly. They couldn't produce any of the paperwork the board wanted, and so they stopped them from being open. And that ended up being very, very expensive, both like from the mental health side and
Yes.
and that the price of that is almost like priceless, like having peace of mind is so important. So the mental health part and also the legal side was very expensive and totally avoidable with just a few contracts in the beginning, like something called an MSA agreement, supervision agreements for the RN, doing good faith exams. So we were able to get the board investigation closed, but because you're talking about an administrative agency, what happens is they don't have like a deadline. So something like this can take a year of back and forth, and that's like at the shortest. So it's just really, really disruptive. So that was one of these situations that was totally avoidable. And at that time they had employees that they were paying, marketing, and thank God that the agency they were working with was great and was able to shut down some of the advertising, which goes to Michael's point. Like, you want to work with someone who's very responsive. So if you are in this disaster situation, they can log into your accounts quickly and do what's needed, as opposed to, you having to submit some kind of ticket and hear from them in a week. So that was one.
Oh my gosh. That's my gosh, thank you for sharing that. That's got to be someone's worst nightmare, right? Is that a couple of hours of work, a little bit of money, and you avoid all these issues, and they have to shut your business, probably file for bankruptcy, and just the mental wear. And you talked about these agencies at a state level, time's on their side. They don't care. They'll drag this thing out as long as they want. And honestly, the cost for them, they're like, yeah, it's all wrapped in. We got the attorney general, we got all these pieces. They all work for the government. So it's not, the cost for them is nothing. It's your tax dollars that are paying for all these things. And then everything else is coming out of your pocket to try to defend this. And so huge, things that can be avoided. So, really, really important. Yeah. Michael, how about you? Any specific, examples of things you've seen?
So, I mean, this is kind of going, and first of all, that is an awful story to hear about your that practice that you knew, Sara. So my heart goes out to that. But I think that that story really does illustrate again why having the proper infrastructure is so really critical. I will tell you, there's a story that I came across. It was actually a plastic surgeon, and I'll just kind of leave that information with where it's at right there. But doctor was really trying to be, pretty aggressive with their strategy, and with that sense of aggression, really kind of lost sight of the foundational principles and was working with a company that really didn't also have that in their best interest either. So long story short, part of some of these aggressive marketing tactics were to really, showcase so many before and after photos of the patient. And part of that particular practice's process is they could upload those cases directly onto the website's photo gallery. Now, the company that this particular plastic surgeon was working with did not have any processes or protocols in place to actually scrub the naming data of that particular before and after file. So before you knew it, this particular patient that just had a breast augmentation done, when she was Googling her name, all of a sudden saw her before and after photos right there on a Google search. And it's just simply because the infrastructure of this particular marketing company did not set that practice up for success. I mean, imagine how horrific that might have been for that patient, right? Awful. And this is kind of another aspect as well, too, where I would say that a big problem that a lot of practice owners, what they don't really account for in terms of setting up your marketing infrastructure properly, is taking the time to really look under the hood of the marketing company that they work with. All too often, people are just driven by what's the cheapest price and let me go with that guy. Again, cheap doesn't necessarily always mean it's going to win for you. With our organization, for example, like we have processes in place that will mitigate those types of problems, because we know, especially if clients are uploading their own cases, they might not necessarily be taking the time to say scrub the naming data. So something like that, I really don't know where that story went after that, to be honest with you. I mean, I'm sure that there was a big lawsuit that might have been followed as a result of that, but that's oftentimes too how your marketing can really create some business issues for you if you don't really have the right infrastructure or the right partners in place to help you.
Yeah, that's crazy. Thank you for sharing that. Sara, kind of come back to you, and I want to reflect on something you mentioned when we were together a couple of weeks ago, and that is, and you referenced it as well, that 30 states here allow this, others don't. This is becoming a tricky environment, right, for a lot of these med spa and aesthetic practice startups. It almost feels like the wild, wild west, with legislation changing state by state all the time. What are some of these? Talk about in more detail what some of these pitfalls mean, and some examples of various changes in laws state by state. And I thought it was fascinating, some of the things that you have to do internally to stay on top of this. So maybe talk about those for a minute.
Yeah. So we as a firm have a person whose job is to really full-time look out for new rules that are coming out across the country every single day. And because the volume of what's changing and what's happening is so high. But just to give you an example, like some states have issued things that say only nurse practitioners can perform treatment X, effective immediately. Or some states have issued rules that say, okay, from now on, estheticians are not allowed to do X, Y, and Z. And then we have this new law called USP 797, which affects every single IV hydration business. And a lot of people are not compliant with it. That law talks about how you can't mix more than a certain number of ingredients. And if you're not using them within 4 hours, you basically have to have a special room with a hood and a very expensive setup. And I think a lot of people are just not aware, but there is a way to comply that's pretty straightforward, because there's some exceptions, and there are ways to be compliant that where you don't need to spend $50,000. It's just about like proactively investing in figuring out what those are and having a legal partner versus trying to do it on your own and then really thinking, okay, if I get in trouble, I'll fix it. But then the fixed part becomes very, very, very expensive.
My gosh, yes. So I hope those who are listening today are thinking, I don't want to keep up on this stuff. And you shouldn't, you want to be able to focus on your business and delivering great care to your patients. And so this is one more reason why hire a pro, hire somebody who's constantly looking out for you and becomes your advisor. It's absolutely worth it. Michael, you want to say something? Go
I
ahead.
was gonna ask Sarah a question. Like, Sarah, how often is like your team really combing through some of these state by state laws? I mean, how often do you get new notifications that there are updates within like how each state is really operating their legal infrastructure as it relates to aesthetics practices?
I would say several times a week.
Wow.
So, I mean, the pace of change is very, very, very rapid. And
Wow.
there's a lot of changes coming, because what's happening is right now the industry is not really regulated on a nationwide level. And every state is kind of trying to see, okay, like we don't have a definition of microneedling anywhere in our laws, because microneedling, for example, is too new. So they're struggling and trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we regulate this? Okay, let's put it into the code for estheticians, and then some other state will put it into the code for nurse practitioners. So it's really changing very, very rapidly. And unfortunately, what's happening is when there's a big situation like a patient death, like there was one in Texas recently at an IV hydration place.
Heard about
All
that.
of a sudden, there's this huge pressure from around the country to say, oh my God, somebody needs to fix this. And then some legislator just says, okay, like we're going to write a new bill and it's going to, we're going to try to push this through. So there's a lot of changes happening because the growth in the industry is so high and the amount of adverse events is going up.
Sure.
Oh my gosh, it's huge. Sarah, I'm going to come back to you in a minute. I want you to think about this question because talking about how there's so much, not the regulations are so all over the place, and I want you to maybe talk about this in just a minute. 2024, what you see happening as we go into new legislative session, and what a lot of these states are going to do. Because anytime there's a death, we've seen that happen in Florida on numerous occasions where there were individuals who should not have been doing anything. They were injecting all kinds of weird things. People are looking for cost savings, right? And anytime that happens, it feels like those great providers are getting punished, if you will. And so we'll come back to that and kind of talk about what you're seeing and what practices should be aware of going into 2024. But Michael, I want to come back to you first. You've talked about this idea a couple of times, and those who are listening, I think would be asking the same question. And by the way, I forgot to mention this at the beginning. If you do have some questions that you would like, please put them in the Q&A section. I'm going to leave some time here for both Michael and Sarah to address those. And so feel free to ask questions anytime in that section. We are recording this, of course, today as well. And so this will be available to you afterwards. So Michael, my question is this. How do they know who they can trust? Because there are so many different companies out there. There's from device manufacturers to legal companies to marketing companies, to other software companies. And it's not, how do they research? How do they know? How do you develop this trust? How do you know what really, well, yeah, Michael says trust somebody, but I just went to this conference and this company made this presentation that sounded amazing. It was this case study, the numbers look great. And then I went to this other one and they're great. And everyone seems great, So yes, I mean, of course, everyone's put their best foot forward. How do you get through the garbage to know who really to trust?
So I think it's a multifaceted answer. But a few things from the outside looking in, would say number one is when you're looking at trust, you have to understand like how long has this company been around for? Because the longevity of their organization speaks volumes in terms of how they've grown clientele, the resources that they have to really help to make you successful. I'm actually kind of a shameless plug here, but I'm very proud to say whenever we go to any one of these conferences that we are actually one of the oldest companies in this space, which also means that we're the most resource driven and we have the most to offer in terms of your support. So the longevity is certainly one of them. Secondly, though, and this is where I kind of go back to, you got to take the time to look under the hood, understanding how data driven is the company that you're working with. Do they have data that they can show you in terms of overall aggregate results with different solutions that they might offer? we preach this word KPIs and understanding your data, and that if you really want to grow a business, you don't do it through speculation, but going back to what does your data say? And so, what processes does the company that you have that you're choosing to work with on a marketing perspective follow? Do they have a playbook and a formula that they've cultivated to put you into a position for success? Or is it just kind of the whole same song and dance? Oh, you got to buy some ads, you got to do some social posts, you got to do some SEO. Those things are all very, very effective strategies, guys, for those of you who are business owners that are actively invested into marketing. Those are great things to be doing, but they're also not necessarily the first things that you do. And even if your practice is established for many, many years, it's amazing how many times I see practice owners have a very unfortified foundation of their web presence. For example, they might be doing a ton of ads online, but yet they have no Google reviews to support that, or maybe their Google review rating is really, really low. And so when a marketing company allows you to make those types of higher end investments, but knowing that you have some other things that you need to really address that are going to affect the cost of those investments, that's a really big recipe for failure. And I know that this is probably going to be a little bit controversial, but I'm going to say it here. You want to work with a marketing company that has a contract that will require a certain amount of time for you to be with them. And the reason why I say that, guys, is because when a marketing company does have a contract, what it allows them to build a business around is predictable revenue that they can then reinvest back into you. It's a cyclical process and that's where, again, having a partner in this space as opposed to a vendor is very, very, very important. I field a lot of frustrating calls from practices that are tired of not being able to communicate with their marketing team, that they're tired of feeling like they're spending a lot of money but having zero idea in terms of return on investment. And generally speaking, one of the first things that I'll ask them is, well, like, are you in a contract with your current company right now? And they say, no, I can leave whenever. Well, the problem with that type of a business model then is that organization, that marketing company that you've hired, is now chasing the next business, and they're chasing the next business without really chasing you and investing into you. And so that's a really, really big thing, that if you really want results to flourish, that you want to have some time commitment that you're really signing up for. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you spend a lot of money within that time commitment. I mean, there's various degrees in terms of where you invest or how you invest, but really the marker of a good company is really going to be one that's also built off of good resources.
Right. I love it. I couldn't agree with you more. This is my 25th year of helping practices with their marketing, and I'm passionate about it and I love it. During that time, kind of echoing what you're saying, I've seen what I would call a lot of charlatans, various companies that pop up that feel like, oh, the aesthetic space, and those that don't know marketing, this is going to be easy money. And I've seen those companies come and go, and those that have staying power, that are actually invested and want to help the companies, those are the ones to look for, whether it's in the marketing, whether it's in the device side, whether it's in the financing. You look for those that know the industry, that have experience in it, that isn't just someone down the street, someone in my neighborhood, somebody that actually understands the industry as well is really important. So, which is awesome. So Sara, come back to you, Michael, come back to you on the future questions we have, where you see things going, and then we've got some questions coming in and want to hear from our audience today. So looking ahead to 2024, what are some of the things that maybe keep you up at night, or like, wow, these are some things that I need to make sure that my clients know about, so that I can best advise them and best help them, and even those that aren't, because you're always doing webinars and other things to try to educate, whether they work with you or not. So for our group today, what do we need to be thinking about and worrying about going into this next year?
Great question. I think on the product side, there are going to be a lot of new products coming. Injectable products, medical devices, I'm sure new marketing innovations, new ways to invest your money. And the market will become more and more fragmented, in the sense where now, let's say, Allergan and Botox is probably 60 to 70% of the market, and the other toxins are 30, maybe 40%. Now, there are a lot of new players that will have more market share. So what that means is possibly like splitting your business between all these players, or just sticking with one or two companies and making big new capital investments into like the latest and greatest machine. So I think with all these new things that are coming out, people have to be really careful about bringing on all these new things. And if they come with $100,000 price tag, really thinking about, okay, like I'm going to buy this $100,000 laser. I really need to think about, I need to allocate X amount of dollars to also market this device. It's not going to bring people through the door, no matter what the people say. If the vendor says, using our physician locator on our website, you're going to get lots of clients. No, you're not. You're going to need to have marketing. So just make sure that before you sign the contract, you have a lawyer review it in terms of buying big equipment, and that you really know that if you bring on this new thing, it may take away revenue from your other things, as opposed to bring in brand new clients, unless you're really marketing for new clients with that device using a strategy. So that's going to be, I think, one of the main things, because a lot of clients come to us and they say, hey, Sarah, help me get out of this device purchase contract I signed. And I'm like, well, here are the 10 possible clauses, but they're pretty ironclad. And this is going to be a big fight. So yeah, that's my first one. And my second one is, I think there's going to be more regulation coming on the state level. I think that federal regulation takes a lot more time, and I don't see anything major happening federal wise. State wise, I think that there'll be a lot more scrutiny on who can be a medical director and medical director requirements, and what the scope of practice, particularly for registered nurses and estheticians, will be. So if you're in one of those categories, if you're a medical director for people, if you're a registered nurse or an esthetician, you really have to have some legal partner who's looking out for you for these changes, because it's not like you can't say, I didn't know. That's not a valid defense in the legal system. Unfortunately, I wish it was. Then all these, different board investigations would be so much cheaper, but it's not. So I think that those are the two main things. The other like small thing is, there were a lot of COVID exceptions to the laws, and a lot of flexibilities about telehealth, about prescribing controlled substances like testosterone, for example, where you could do certain things remotely, and those things are going away. So people have to be careful if you're prescribing a lot of things virtually as opposed to in person, just making sure that you're compliant with these things, because things are changing on a federal level because COVID is over.
Great insights.
I see that a
Michael.
lot. I see a lot of the telehealth model in our space as well too, Sarah. I mean, people that, to be honest with you, I have a doctor that I live in Pennsylvania, but she helps me with some alternative medicine that's in New Jersey. And so, I mean, yeah, it's definitely becoming a bigger thing. One thing that just in terms of the pace of the updated regulation on a state by state level that you had mentioned earlier, like that really blew me away. I myself was not even that familiar with how often new regulations are being really overseen in that space. I will say though that that speed of pace also is really reflective with what we see digitally as well too. Hate to be a cliche and a buzzword here, but AI is obviously changing a lot of the landscape in terms of how we're going to build strategies out, the accessibility to content, the ease of being able to make new content pieces that years ago would have taken hours to do within just a matter of seconds. With all that being said, though, what I will say is that when we relate to really what drives a lot of your acquisition revenue, that being Google, when patients are seeking out services, Google's gotten a lot more scrupulous just in terms of what the content strategies that it's looking to analyze. I'm actually putting a link into the chat here for everybody, and you're welcome to take a look at this if you would like. But Google's helpful content updates what you might want to know. And one of the biggest things that we're seeing in terms of a shift with content strategies for website, video, SEO, etc., is Google really looking to get away from websites that are really trying to just game the system or game the Google algorithm by having, keyword stuffing and things of that nature, but really going back to content that is truly helpful for the patient. That's the new thing right now, is driving content that is actually going to serve your audience, as opposed to content that you're cultivating just to give you more exposure. So as we head into 2024, this is a really opportune time to look at your web strategy, especially with your website's information, and look at your content. One thing that we've been kind of doing for years now that I think really placates well into this helpful content algorithm update is questions and answers. One thing that I'll always tell a lot of my practices that I serve is that, what are the common questions that your patients are asking you about certain services or procedures at your practice? Are you answering those questions on your website? Are you developing, say, helpful video content that can really serve the patient well? Just even before our webinar here today, I was on my Instagram, and an account that I recently followed, a nurse injector was just putting out a video just to say the importance of showing up early to your appointment, especially if you're new, because this really does give me an opportune time to get to know you a little bit more, understand a lot of your aesthetic goals. And I got to tell you, my Instagram feed with the accounts that I follow are full of people dancing and maybe mouthing scenes from other movie scenes, but it's not really serving the patient. And so
Right.
getting into that service mindset in terms of the content that you're cultivating and driving is really going to be a game changer for your strategy as we head into next year.
Thank you. The phrase that Google is using, these are 2 words, write this down: information gain. And that's exactly what Michael's talking about. You need to be able to provide value. So, when people are looking at your content, and I'll tell you, we actually we're getting ready to release a new 2024 marketing study we did. We actually interviewed 450 patients across all the states, various demographics. And one of the answers to this, there's actually 8 main key points we have on this report, but one of them was, how many doctors do you visit, or practices? Do you research before you're making a decision? And the answer was 2 to 5. They're looking at others. So how do you get your marketing to stand out, right? How do you provide something of value that others don't have, and then create that connection with them? So, critical. But thank you very much. Well, hey, I want to shift over to some of the questions that are coming in, and if there's others who have questions, please go ahead and put that in the Q&A section. But I've got a couple here. So first one, Sara, this is for you. What is the best structure for a med spa in California? I know S Corp with physician owner. Is there any way to keep my anonymity? You're on mute.
Okay, great. So great question. And just a small disclaimer, I'm not one of the California licensed attorneys at my firm, but we do have someone licensed in California. But based on my knowledge, I would say that California is one of the stricter states. And with California, if you do a strict physician ownership model, then you do a 51% physician, and then the other 49% can be an RN or a nurse practitioner. So can that entity be totally anonymous? Sort of. What you would do is you would use a third-party registered agent company. So when it shows who the owner is, at least they would see like the registered agent and not maybe your name specifically. But there isn't a way that I can think of that would make it completely anonymous. My question back would also be, what's the reason for wanting it to be totally anonymous? From a legal liability perspective, like you will be found if there's an issue, and also from like a patient relationship perspective, I don't know if necessarily you want everything to be anonymous, because patients generally, from the legal like relationship perspective, like knowing who the owner is of a practice. It makes them feel like it's less of an anonymous kind of place, and it's more of like a real place. So I would say, think about perhaps not making it anonymous, because if patients feel like you're hiding anything from them, they get much more and higher and much more likely to, want to create problems.
Yeah.
Awesome. Another question is, as a registered nurse in New York, I know that I must practice under a doctor as a nurse injector. However, I want to know if the doctor has to be on site.
So this is a very common question, and this is a question that would be the same for many other states as well. So in New York, the doctor does not have to be on site. So there are some states where the doctor has to be, but generally, if you're a registered nurse, the doctor doesn't have to be on site. But New York is one of these states that prohibits the corporate practice of medicine. So what that means is, as a registered nurse, you can't just open an LLC and open a medical practice. You have to have this MSO, MSA model. So even if the doctor is not on site, they have to be involved in the ownership structure. And as a registered nurse, you need somebody else to do the good faith exams, somebody who's a prescriber, meaning a PA, an NP, or an MD. So there are some additional complications, but the doctor does not have to be on site.
Perfect. Next question for both of you. How do you address ADA compliance on a web and within a practice? Michael, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll start on that first as well too. So guys, ADA compliance is a really big issue right now. I was actually giving a webinar a few weeks ago through AR, and we kind of were discussing the need for having actually a healthcare compliant website. And just how you might have a ramp that leads into your office's location for wheelchair accessibility, so does your website. Your website actually needs to cater to folks that might have disabilities. Now, for those of you who are watching this, or if you have a website and your site is not ADA compliant, it's not just as simple as, slapping a little line of code on your site and then calling it good. A lot of the ADA compliancy really needs to be integrated into your website's infrastructure, all of your pages, the content, things of that nature. This is kind of going back, Chad, to what you had asked earlier. Just, how do you know who to trust? I mean, educate yourself in terms of, what your website actually needs as a healthcare practice. That really being one of them. When we build websites for our clients, all of that infrastructure is already been thought of. That website seatbelt has been clicked, so to speak, and so it's not a worry that any of our clients really have to worry about. But I will tell you, I mean, AmSpa has put out literature about this to their membership base. ASPS has put out literature about this to their membership base, and you also might think about that. And I read this article in Forbes recently that over 70% of the ADA cases that are being brought to business owners are not on the corporate entity level. It's actually the small business owner that's making less than, say, $5 million per year. So it does certainly will create some legal problems by not having that on your website. So it's just almost like having website insurance. Just make sure that you have that on there, because if not, it's certainly putting a lot of your operations at risk and exposure.
Great. Sarah.
Yeah, we had a couple of clients who, there are these law firms who specialize in finding websites that are not ADA compliant and then sending them a complaint on behalf of some anonymous patient,
Right.
and trying to settle it for thousands of dollars. So we had a couple of clients who had these and had to settle for $5,000 to $10,000 for really something that was, again, very, very, very much avoidable. So yeah, ADA compliance for websites is very real. And I know Michael has a whole system that's integrated into how they build the websites that has ADA compliance as part of it. And it's definitely a must.
Yeah. One of our clients has been a client for 20 years, got one of these letters, and listen, these are shakedown letters often. And this one was so bogus, from somebody demanding about $1,279. It was down to a very specific amount, saying, oh, it was 2 hours that I had to meet with an attorney because your website didn't have contrast on it. It actually does, which was ironic. And they were saying, well, I was looking for a septoplasty and I couldn't find it. You've caused me damage. it's a plastic surgeon who does breast body work. He doesn't even do nose jobs. He doesn't even work. He's like, so we were able to help him quickly. Here's your letter. Send this back. Tell her to go pound sand, basically, because it was one of those deals where, listen, you know what, you're so off base here. And so where the website is compliant, it had everything it needed, and she was off base. It basically was sending, his attorney quickly reviewed it, sent it back, but it was basically saying, look, we're going to come after you for false accusation, which is 5 to 20 years in prison for extortion and 1 to 4 years for false accusation. And she quickly went away. So anyway, we know how to deal with some of those things, especially with the troublemakers. But hey, we've seen those that didn't have it, and we've had some old websites we've taken over before where we've like, you got to do this, you got to upgrade, and they don't. And next thing you know, they're on the hook for $5,000 to $10,000. And we've preached it over and over again. You've got to make these changes, and they don't. So it can be a challenge. I think we've got someone's raising their hand. Let me just see here real quick. Oh, they must have put their hand down. If somebody else had a question, please put it in the Q&A section. But we're going to wrap up here last minute or two. But if you've got any more questions, please put those in real quick. But yeah, I saw somebody raise their hand and then maybe put it back down, which is okay. Anyway, Michael and Sara, let me give each of you just a minute to say kind of some closing thoughts today, and then I'll wrap it up.
Sure. I think prevention is way cheaper and better than correction. Just like with Botox, right? It's better, I think, to start it in your 20s or 30s than to try to fix things in your 50s. And that's the same with legal, and it's the same with marketing. You have to make the investment upfront. We as a law firm really try to help our clients as much as we can once trouble starts, and if they contact us at that point. But I really love helping people like right at the beginning, because right at the beginning is where you're really building the foundation for this beautiful house that you're building. And I want to help you build a really beautiful, huge house that's going to have locations in every state, and it will be really well known. So I hope that the advice that we gave you today was helpful. And if you need any other information, we offer a free consultation on our website.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sara. Michael.
I just want to thank again everyone for the opportunity to talk to you here today, especially as we're rounding out our last few weeks here of 2023. Like Sara, I also very much enjoy really getting to help my clients, and especially those that might be really new into this space and they're lacking a directive in terms of what is it that I do, or how do I really go about doing it. Given a talk yesterday just about how a lot of practices kind of get in their own way because they don't know who to trust in this space. I mean, there are folks that are in this market, in this arena, Sara, myself included, that really do want to help you. That is what our incentives are really driven by. It's not necessarily the value of what you spend, but it's about how we really extend that relationship and really build something collaboratively together. So if that resonates with you, and if you're obviously if you're in a position where you're heading into next year not having a good marketing strategy, or if you're not necessarily knowing how to really build the building blocks of your legal infrastructure, I know that Sara and myself would love to really talk to you about how those things and how we can help you. Happy to send some, folks that are here an email later just with my contact information to reach out if you have any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you to both of you, Michael and Sara. Always great to have you here. To those who are watching, listening, I personally applaud you. Thank you. It is not easy to be a business owner. As a business owner myself, and Sara as well, we get it, right? There's so many hats you wear. So we applaud you. We applaud you for taking the time today to invest in yourself and your practice, and to take time to learn, maybe hopefully something you didn't know before. But trust those who are here to guide you. We look forward to that. We look forward to working with you in 2024 and beyond. If we can be of assistance, please let us know. But we want nothing more than for you to be successful and to reap all the fruits of what you plant. So anyway, here to help you. We wish you all the best this holiday season. And until the next time, we'll talk to you later. Take care.
Bye, everyone.